My son put his hands on me in my own laundry room, and I didn't make a sound. But when he came downstairs the next morning thinking I'd just let it slide like always, he stopped breathing for a second when he saw who was sitting at my dining table. There I was, at the head of that table, running my hand over the lace cloth my mama made when Darnell strolled into the room, acting like he owned the place. He hadn't even bothered looking at my busted lip. Too busy thinking about himself. He snatched up one of those cornbread muffins, bit into it, and started running his mouth about how things were going to be different around here from now on. But honey, those words got stuck in his throat when the chair beside me scraped back. His face went from that sweaty, glassy look to straight-up gray, like death itself had walked into the room. That muffin dropped right out of his hand and broke apart on the floor. And he understood, right in that moment, that me being quiet the night before wasn't me being scared. It was me passing judgment. But so you understand how we ended up at a breakfast table that felt more like a courtroom. You gotta know who I am first. Name's Dorothy Williams, 69 years old, widow, and I've been living in this old Charleston neighborhood my whole adult life. You know those houses with the big porches out front and the oak trees with Spanish moss hanging down? That's where I am. Folks always called me a peaceful woman. After Thomas died, I raised Darnell by myself, worked 2 jobs so that boy would never go without. But until 6 hours before that breakfast, I didn't realize I'd been sleeping under the same roof as my worst enemy. First batch of those cornbread muffins came out around 10 after 4 that morning. The smell of butter and heavy cream filled up every corner of the house. Normally that smell means safety, home, lazy Sunday afternoons. But in those dark hours before dawn, it was the smell of me getting my courage together. Thick enough to choke on. I set those hot pans down on the stovetop, and the metal settled with these little sounds in all that quiet. My hands were white with flour, looked like I'd dipped them in paint. Moving around that kitchen, I had this calmness over me that wasn't really mine, more like I'd borrowed it, put it on like armor over the shaking woman who'd been on that floor hours before. While I measured out ingredients for the next batch, my eyes caught something on the counter by the sugar jar. One of those smart display frames, you know the kind? Black screen, real modern looking. Regina gave it to me last Christmas. She'd said over the phone that I didn't need those dusty old albums anymore, that she'd ordered this online and it was real nice, that I just put my pictures in and it shows them one after another, helps you remember the good times. And there it sat, cycling through my whole life day and night, just kept showing me what I'd lost, over and over. Right when I glanced at it, a picture came up on that screen. Darnell. Couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Standing in a fishing boat, hair sticking up all wild from the wind, grinning with that gap where his front tooth used to be. Holding up this little catfish with both hands like he'd caught Moby Dick himself. Next to him was Thomas, my husband, smiling so big his eyes were nearly closed shut with pride. Sweet Jesus, that picture hit me like a freight train. Had to grab onto the counter edge, getting flour on everything. Closed my eyes, and suddenly I wasn't in that kitchen at 4 a.m. with a split lip. I was back at Lake Murray on that hot day in '91. Could smell the sunscreen mixed with lake water. Could hear Thomas laughing, that deep belly laugh of his echoing across the water. Darnell had been trying to catch something all morning long. Such a patient little boy, so determined. When he finally felt that line go tight, he squealed loud enough to scare every bird in the county. Thomas helped him reel it in, nice and easy, showing him the right way to hold a fish. I remember Thomas yelling over to me where I was setting up our lunch on the shore, telling me to look, saying we had us a real fisherman now. The way his voice sounded. So full of pride it about made my heart burst, and Darnell looking up at his daddy like Thomas hung the moon and stars. With this love in his eyes, this respect, felt like nothing could ever break it. Where did that little boy disappear to? Where'd I lose him along the way? The frame switched to another picture. Darnell in his high school graduation robe, the blue one, holding up his diploma. I was standing next to him looking 30 years younger, smiling so wide it hurt. First person in our whole family to go to college. First one ever. Our church, Grace Methodist, threw him a big party. Sister Beatrice made his favorite red velvet cake with that cream cheese frosting piled high. Pastor William said a blessing over him during service, called him our young scholar, showing the path forward for all of us. Remember sitting in that pew feeling like my chest would explode from pride. Dorothy Williams's boy. The son Thomas didn't live long enough to see graduate. Because Thomas was already gone when Darnell turned 21 in his final year at school. Heart attack took him, right there on the shipyard docks. Left for work that morning, kissed my forehead like every other day, never walked back through our door. Losing Thomas felt like an earthquake that knocked the foundation right out from under us. But we made it through. I got strong for Darnell's sake. At the funeral, that boy held my hand so tight, I lost feeling in my fingers. Didn't shed one tear where anybody could see. Just stood tall and serious, looking exactly like his father. Later that night, when everybody'd left, he grabbed onto me in this very kitchen and sobbed. Told me he was taking care of me from now on, that he promised, that he was going to make Daddy proud. And for a long while, he kept that promise. Graduated with good grades, got himself a solid office job at the same port where Thomas had worked. Bought a nice car, helped pay bills around here. Every Wednesday, he'd drive me to church, sit right beside me in our pew, sing those hymns in that deep voice just like his daddy's. Old folks would tell me I'd raised that boy right, that Thomas was up there smiling. I believed every word, lived on that pride like it was oxygen. Watching Darnell become a good man, a man folks respected. That was proof my sacrifices meant something. The frame flickered again. More recent picture. 4th of July cookout in our backyard, maybe 3 years back. Darnell at the grill wearing an apron that said Grill Master, laughing at something, looked happy. Our neighbors were there, Eleanor and her husband before he passed. Looked like something out of a magazine, that perfect life. But sometimes happy is just a photograph. A frozen second that doesn't tell the real story. Because right after that cookout, things started going wrong. Started with work. They called it restructuring. Port was modernizing, bringing in younger people with computer skills and new ideas. Darnell's job, the one he'd held solid for almost 20 years, suddenly got optimized away. That's how they put it. They knocked him down to a lower position, gave him some desk shoved back in a corner, way less responsibility, and worse than anything, way less respect from people. For Darnell, losing that title wasn't just about the paycheck, felt like they were spitting on Thomas's grave somehow. Like his father's whole legacy at that port got erased. He didn't tell me much at first, just went quiet. But his quiet had edges to it, sharp ones that'd cut you if you got close. Started coming home later. I'd smell whiskey on him, but pretend I didn't. He'd lie straight to my face, telling me he'd worked late that day. And I'd nod because I wanted to believe my boy. Money got tight after that. He'd ask me to spot him $250, saying he'd get it back to me end of the month. I'd give it to him. Never saw a dime of it. Then it was $600. Just kept going like that. First time he raised his voice at me in a way that made me actually scared. I can still see it clear as day. Over something stupid, too. Kitchen faucet was dripping. I'd asked him 3-4 times to fix it. That Sunday morning I brought it up again, asking when he got a chance could he take a look at that faucet. I was standing at the sink, rinsing some mustard greens. He was at the table with his newspaper. Didn't even look up. Just said real low to let the damn thing drip. That rudeness caught me off guard. I tried to explain that it was wasting water and the sound bothered me when I was trying to... That's when he exploded. Slammed that newspaper down so hard the coffee cup jumped. Stood up fast, and for the first time ever, he loomed over me. Not my boy anymore. A big, angry man I didn't recognize. He started shouting loud enough to rattle the windows, asking if I was worried about a damn dripping faucet when his whole life was falling apart. He said if Daddy was here, this wouldn't be happening, that his father was a real man who would have handled things. But no, he said he was stuck with me, a woman who cared more about a leaky faucet than her own son. I took a step back from him, heart pounding in my chest, grabbed onto that sink edge, hands cold and wet. Wasn't even what he said that scared me. It was his eyes. Saw something in them I'd never seen before, something mean and poisonous. And right then I felt fear, not fear for him, but fear of him. Didn't answer, just stood there watching while he snatched up his car keys and stormed out, door slamming hard enough to shake the whole house. Left me in that kitchen listening to the faucet going drip, drip, drip. Each drop marking time for a new chapter in our life. The chapter where I became afraid in my own home. I sighed and pulled myself back to that cold morning, smell of muffins baking again. Pulled the pan out with oven mitts, heat hitting my bruised face. The picture frame had switched again, me and Thomas on our wedding day. So young, so full of hope neither of us understood yet. "Oh, Thomas," I whispered to the empty room. "You wouldn't recognize what our boy turned into." Reached for the mixing bowl to start another batch. Gonna need a whole lot more muffins. After all, I had important company coming for breakfast. And Eleanor Mitchell. She always did love my cornbread muffins with blackberry jam. That grandfather clock in the living room chimed 5. Deep, sad bells rolling through the house, marking another hour of me sitting up in the dark. Already had 3 batches of muffins cooling on wire racks, lined up perfect and golden like little soldiers. My kitchen, which had always been my safe place, my creative space, had turned into something else that night. A war room, moving around with this precision that came from somewhere deep inside, but my body was starting to pay the price. My back where I'd hit that washing machine throbbed with this dull, mean ache. My lip was swollen, pulsing, and exhaustion was creeping into my bones like slow poison. Needed coffee, strong. Went to the counter and hit the button on my coffee maker. One of those automatic ones, you know? Black, real modern, bought it a few months back thinking it'd make mornings easier. Programmable and everything, could set it up the night before with the water and grounds, have it start brewing at 6 so Darnell would wake up to fresh coffee. Thought maybe if he smelled that first thing, his mood wouldn't be so foul when he got up. Maybe he wouldn't start the day with that dark cloud already hanging over him. What a fool I was, thinking the smell of coffee could sweeten a bitter man. Last few months, that coffee maker had just become another tool in my routine of walking on eggshells around here. Made sure coffee was always ready. Made sure his favorite mug, that big blue ceramic one, was clean and sitting in its spot. Made sure the newspaper was on the table. Any little thing out of place, any tiny break in the routine I'd built to keep him calm, could set off a whole day of him being cruel and giving me the silent treatment. As that hot water started dripping through, making that wonderful roasted smell fill the air, I let myself sit down for just a minute. Closed my eyes. Pain in my back flared up sharp, and the memories from the last 2 years came flooding in like a burst dam. Not the good ones on that photo frame, the ones I tried shoving to the back of my mind every single day. After that first blow-up about the faucet, things never went back to right. That incident opened up some door inside him, let out a monster I didn't know was living in there. And me, out of fear, out of shame, out of this mother's love that was turning toxic, I let that monster make itself at home in my house. The full layoff came 6 months later. They called him into the supervisor's office on a Monday afternoon, handed him a cardboard box for his things. 20 years of service, tossed out like yesterday's trash. He came home that day looking gray, carrying that box like it was a casket. Didn't cry, didn't yell. Just set it down in the middle of the living room, went upstairs, and stayed in his room for 2 straight days. I'd knock on his door, bring him food on a tray, beg him to come out and talk to me. Nothing. 3rd day he came out. And he was a different person. Whatever tiny bit of respect he'd had left, that last spark of the boy the church had cheered for, gone. From that day on, everything became my fault. If it rained, somehow that was on me. If his football team lost, must be my fault. And most of all, his father being gone was my fault. He'd scream in my face with breath already stinking of liquor at 3 in the afternoon, saying I never understood Thomas, asking if I thought his father was happy working himself into an early grave at that port. He'd say Thomas worked himself into an early grave for me, for this house. And what did I do? I turned the place into a shrine. He'd say I worshipped the chair his daddy sat in more than the son he left behind. It was cruel. It was a lie. Thomas loved his work, was proud to provide for us. And me? I loved Thomas. Wasn't worshipping objects, I was cherishing memories. But how do you explain that to a man who's rewritten his whole history to justify his misery? The house that used to be my refuge turned into my battlefield. I learned to read the signs. How he slammed the car door, the sound of his footsteps on that porch. Could tell from those little things whether the night would be full of screaming or frozen silence. Both kinds were torture. The money manipulation got worse, stopped asking permission, started just taking, using my credit card without saying a word. I'd see the bills roll in, charges from bars, liquor stores. I'd try to talk to him about it, saying we needed to watch our spending. Same answer every time. He'd say it was his money too, the money Daddy left, asking if I thought this house just paid for itself somehow. He forgot that I had my own retirement, Thomas's pension. Money I made doing alterations for ladies in the neighborhood. But in his head, everything was his. The house, the money, and apparently me too. To use however he wanted. Became a prisoner in my own home. Stopped inviting friends over for afternoon tea. Eleanor would sometimes catch me outside, asking if everything was all right over here, saying she hadn't seen me in ages. And I'd lie, telling her it was just my arthritis acting up, that I was taking it easy. The shame was eating me alive from the inside. How could I admit my son, the young scholar, the pride of our community, was treating me like dirt? How could I tell her I was scared of my own child? Remember one night, few months back. He came home drunk as usual, but this time he was in a good mood. Won some money playing pool, I think. Came bouncing into the living room where I was watching my programs and flopped down on the couch, laughing loud. Wanted to talk. But I was so tired from riding that emotional roller coaster every single day that I just couldn't do it. Just wanted some peace. I told him I was tired and was heading up to bed. Started to get up. His face changed instantly. That smile vanished like someone flipped a switch. He said, of course, that soon as he's happy, I abandon him. But when he's down, I sit there with that martyr look on my face, staring at him like he's some kind of worm, right? Stood up and came toward me. Didn't touch me that time. Just blocked my way. Started talking low, which was worse than the yelling. Asked if I liked this, if I liked watching him suffer because it made me feel superior. He said I was the holy widow who sacrificed everything for her worthless son. Asked if that was the story I told myself, if that helped me sleep at night. Stood there spitting that poison at me for a good 10 minutes. And I just took it, frozen in place, getting smaller and weaker with every word. When he finally got tired and moved, I went upstairs shaking all over. Got to my room, locked that door, sat on the edge of my bed. And for the first time in forever, I cried. Quiet crying, muffling the sobs in my pillow so he wouldn't hear and get satisfaction from it. The coffee maker finished, giving off its little signal. Coffee was done. I stood up, pain in my back reminding me the violence last night had been different. He'd crossed a physical line. Actually put his hands on me. That slap wasn't just to my face, it was to my soul. Opened the cupboard and got out my best china. The wedding set with those little hand-painted blue flowers. Rarely used it. Saved it for special occasions. And this, I decided, was the most special occasion there'd ever be. The day I took my life back. Set that table with careful attention to every detail. Lace tablecloth, plates, silver that I'd just polished the week before. put a little vase with a white gardenia from my yard in the center. The table looked beautiful, a scene of peace and order, a perfect lie. As I arranged those cups in their places, I thought about the storm outside, that hard rain, howling wind. Felt like nature was matching the storm inside me. But for the first time in forever, I wasn't afraid. Not of the storm outside, not of the one sleeping upstairs. Because I knew when the sun came up, my personal storm was finally going to break and be done. Looked at the clock. 5:45. Still had time. Time to finish the last batch of muffins, and time to make the phone calls that would change everything. This house was about to wake up, and justice was about to be served hot right alongside that coffee. It was exactly 3:15 in the morning when I heard that key scratching at the front door lock. Know the exact time because that grandfather clock had just finished its 3 chimes, and I counted every one of the 15 seconds that came after while I waited. Sitting in my laundry room in that old folding chair, wrapped up in my bathrobe. Burgundy velvet one, thick and soft. Bought it last winter because the Charleston damp gets into my joints something fierce when it's cold. Remember thinking when that package showed up that it felt like a hug wearing it. And that morning, I was clutching it around me like some kind of shield, trying to find warmth when the coldest feeling was coming from inside my own chest. Door flew open with a bang like he'd kicked it, slammed against the wall in the hallway. Sound echoed through the silent house. My heart jumped and started hammering fast in my chest, held my breath, waited. Darnell came stumbling in, just a dark shape against the dim streetlight outside. Rain had gotten heavier, and he was soaked through to the skin. Water dripping from his hair, from his jacket, making a dark puddle on my wood floor. Looked like some wounded, angry animal that had come in from the storm. Just stood there for a second, breathing heavy, almost growling. Then he moved, yanked that key ring out of his pocket with sudden fury and threw it hard toward the little hall table. Heard that sharp crash of something breaking. My pitcher, that green one from my grandmother. Hearing that heirloom shatter felt like my own heart splitting in two. A dry sob rose up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Crying right then? No. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford, and it'd be dangerous. Didn't seem to care what he'd broken. Kicked the door shut and came walking toward the back of the house. His steps were heavy, unsteady. The smell hit me first. Sharp, sour smell of cheap whiskey mixed with rain and pure rage. He stopped in that laundry room doorway, his big body filling up the whole frame. Only light was the one over the washing machine, yellow and dim, casting long, scary shadows everywhere. His eyes found me in the dimness. He asked what it was, his voice thick and sloppy from drinking. Took a step into the room, asking if I was sitting here in the dark like some kind of ghost, waiting up to lecture him, to judge him. Didn't move from that chair. Kept my hands clamped on the armrests, feeling that worn fabric under my fingers. Knew from experience that any move I made could be seen as starting something. Silence was my only defense. He suddenly yelled for me to answer him, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. Asked if I was down here praying for his lost soul or if I was worried about that damn pitcher he broke. Him mentioning that pitcher, the cold way he said it, knowing how much it meant to me, gave me courage I didn't know I had. Stopped rocking in that chair. Slowly, with whatever dignity I had left, I stood up. My back popped. Looked him dead in the eye, trying to find some trace of my boy somewhere in there. I told him I wasn't going to lecture him, that I just wanted him to get some rest, that he was soaked through and would catch cold, and we could talk in the morning when he was feeling better. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Wrong thing to say. Should have known better. Trying to be reasonable with a man who's lost his reason is like trying to put out a house fire with a water glass. My words, my calmness, my motherly concern. To him, it sounded like an insult. Like I was treating him like a child, his face twisted up into pure fury. He roared at me not to tell him what to do, taking another step toward me. Pointed a shaking finger at my face. Said I didn't understand anything, that I never did. that I was living in my little fantasy world with my old junk, my memories, Daddy's ghost. He said the real world was out there and it was eating him alive, and I just sat there and told him to go to sleep. I started to say that wasn't what I meant, holding up a hand, trying to make peace. He shouted at me to shut up. His shout was so violent I flinched back. Then he came at me. Wasn't a push. It was an attack. He grabbed my upper arms with strength I didn't know he had. Strength born from frustration and alcohol. His fingers were like steel claws digging into my skin. Pain was immediate and burning hot. I cried out, begging him to stop, saying he was hurting me. And for the first time my voice broke with real panic. But he wasn't listening. His eyes were glazed over, staring at something only he could see. Started shaking me back and forth violently. My body, frail and old, whipped around like a rag doll. My head snapped back and forth. My glasses flew off my face and hit the floor with a soft sound. The world around me became a blur of lights and shadows spinning. The washing machine, the shelves, the walls. Everything was spinning. He was screaming that I only cared about things, about this house, about Thomas. He said I'm nothing to him, that I never was, just a burden, the failure son of the great Thomas Williams. And with every word he shook me harder. Getting dizzy. Air wouldn't come into my lungs right. Tried to pull away, but it was useless. He was so much stronger than me. At some point during all that violent shaking, my feet left the floor completely. And that's when he threw me. Didn't push me. Threw me like a piece of trash. My body flew backward toward that washing machine and the wall behind it. Time seemed to slow way down. Saw that white metal getting closer, like watching it in slow motion. No time to protect myself, to put my arms out. The impact was brutal. First my back hit with a deep, hollow thud against the machine. Felt like my spine would snap clean in two. The blow knocked every bit of air out of me in one painful gasp. And in that same instant, my head whipped to the side and cracked hard against the concrete wall. An explosion of white light and sharp pain behind my eyes. The sound echoed inside my skull. World went white for a second. Loud ringing like a million bees filled my ears. I slid down, my legs like jelly, and collapsed on that floor in a heap. Pain was overwhelming. Throbbing pain in the back of my head, sharp pain in my back, burning pain in my arms where he'd grabbed me. I was stunned, confused. Tried to focus my eyes, saw the room spinning, lights distorting. Then I saw him, standing a few feet away, chest heaving, fists clenched, looking down at me on that floor with this unreadable expression. And I thought it was over now, that he'd stop, that he'd realize what he'd done. But no. He took a step toward me. I flinched automatically, trying to shield myself with my arms, and his hand came up, open, fast, violent. The slap cracked through the air, caught me square across the face. My head snapped to the side from the force, felt the skin of my lip tear against my own teeth, and the hot, salty taste of blood filled my mouth. And that was it, the final act. He stood there over me for a few more seconds, breathing still heavy. I looked up at him from that floor, my son, the baby I'd carried inside me, the boy I'd taught to walk, to talk, to pray, and I didn't recognize him. The man standing over me with those hate-filled eyes was a stranger, an intruder, a monster. And then, without another word, like he'd finally expelled all the poison he'd been carrying, he turned around, turned his back on his mother, lying bruised and bleeding on the laundry room floor, and he went upstairs, heard his steps, heavy and slow, going up. Then the final sound, his bedroom door slamming shut. A sound that sealed both our fates. The sound that started the longest morning of my life. The silence that settled into that laundry room after his door slammed upstairs was the heaviest thing I've ever felt in all my 69 years. Wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a vacuum, a silence of shock, the kind of quiet that comes after an explosion when everything around you is destroyed and the dust hasn't settled yet. Only thing I could hear was rain outside, relentless, and this sharp ringing inside my own head. Lay there on that cold floor for what felt like forever. My whole body ached, every muscle, every bone screaming. Back of my head throbbed with a steady, sick-making rhythm. Taste of blood in my mouth was strong, could feel a warm trickle running down my chin. I was curled up, arms wrapped around my knees like a scared child. And for a moment, that's all I was. Scared. Terrified. A 69-year-old woman, alone, hurt on her own floor by the person she loved most in this world. The tears came. Silent. Hot. They ran down my face and mixed with the blood on my chin. They weren't tears of anger. They were tears of pure, absolute grief. A grief that wasn't just physical. It was the pain of betrayal. The pain of looking at the child you brought into this world and seeing a stranger. The pain of realizing that all the love you gave, all the life you sacrificed, had produced this. A man who could raise his hand to his own mother. Thought about Thomas. What would he say if he saw me like this? Thomas was a gentle man, but firm. Never once raised his voice to me in 30 years of marriage. Treated his own mother, a tiny, frail woman, like she was made of glass. If he could see what Darnell had become, his heart would break all over again, wherever he was. The image of my husband gave me a spark of something. I couldn't just lie here on this floor crying. Thomas wouldn't want that. My mother wouldn't want that. My grandmother, who faced things I can't even imagine, certainly wouldn't want that. I'm made of stronger stuff than this. I'd just forgotten it for a while. With a groan of pain, I pushed myself up, using the leg of my laundry basket for support. The cold plastic gave me an anchor. Slowly, inch by inch, got to my feet. My legs were shaking so bad I thought I'd fall right back down. Held onto the edge of the washing machine, breathing deep, trying to fight off the dizziness. The whole room seemed to be swaying. When I felt a little steadier, walked slowly, holding on to whatever I could reach, to that little half-bathroom under the stairs. Every step was agony. When I got there, reached out a trembling hand and flipped the light on. Then I looked in the mirror. That yellow bathroom light was harsh and unforgiving. The woman staring back at me was broken. My gray hair, which I always keep neat in a bun, was loose and wild, strands stuck to the sweat on my forehead. My face. My left cheek was hot and swollen, and the skin around my eye was already turning that nasty purple color. And my lip. It was split open, puffy, dried blood forming a dark crust at the corner of my mouth. I raised my hand and touched that bruised cheek with my fingertips. Skin was hot, tender, and as I touched it, I didn't just feel the physical pain, I felt the humiliation, the shame. That mark on my face wasn't just a bruise, it was visible proof of my failure. Failure of a mother who didn't see the monster growing under her roof. Failure of a woman who let fear silence her for too long. And it was right there, looking at that mark in the mirror, that the sadness began to turn into something else. Something cold, hard, anger. But it wasn't hot, explosive anger like Darnell's. It was cold, calculating anger. An anger that didn't scream. It whispered. And what it whispered was, never again. Turned on the cold water tap. Cupped my hands and splashed that icy water on my face once, twice, 3 times. Water stung my cut lip, but it was a good pain. A pain that woke me up. Washed away the blood, the sweat, the tears. Dried my face with a towel, patting gently at the sore spots. And I looked in that mirror again. The broken woman was gone. The woman staring back now had steel in her eyes. There was pain there, yes. Deep pain that might never completely go away. But there was no more fear. The fear had burned away in that cold anger. In its place was resolve. A deadly calm. The calm of someone who's hit rock bottom and found the ground was solid stone you could push off of to climb back up. Thought about my options. Could do nothing. Come morning, put on some makeup to hide the bruise. Say I fell if anybody asked. Darnell might apologize with that weepy, sorry voice he uses sometimes. I'd pretend to accept it. And we'd go back to our routine of me walking on eggshells until the next explosion, and the next one after that. Until when? Until he pushed harder? Until my head hit something in a way I didn't get up from? No, that option was dead and buried. Could pack a bag and leave, call Regina in Colombia, ask for shelter, abandon my home, my memories, my whole life, leave Darnell here to drown in his own bitterness and liquor. But this house was mine. It was my sweat, Thomas's sweat, that paid for it. Why should I be the one to run? I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't going to be the fugitive, so that left only the third option. The hardest one. The most painful one. The only one that felt like a real solution. The only one that might save my life. And who knows, in some twisted, terrible way, might save his life too. Left that bathroom. The laundry room was still a mess. My glasses were on the floor near that folding chair. Picked them up. One lens had a crack running through it. Put them on anyway. That crack in the lens seemed like a symbol of how I saw everything now. The whole world was broken. Walked through the dark living room. Ticking of that grandfather clock seemed louder, marking the rhythm of my decision. Went to get the phone. An old rotary phone sits on a little table in the hall, but I didn't use that one. Went to the kitchen and got the cordless phone, a newer one I'd bought a few years back. One with big backlit buttons, you know? Made for older folks, so dialing's easier. Bought it because my fingers sometimes get stiff from arthritis. Never thought I'd be so grateful for those big buttons, because my hands in that moment were shaking hard. Not from fear, though, from nervous determination. Took that phone into the dining room, sat in my chair at the head of the table, the same table where in a few hours everything would happen, took a deep breath, and I made the first call. Night was still dark, but my mind had never been clearer. The plan began forming, piece by piece. Wasn't a plan for revenge. It was a plan for survival. Didn't want to destroy my son. Needed to stop the monster he'd become. And if I had to break his heart doing it, and break my own in the process, then so be it. Sometimes hearts need to be broken so the light can get in. I was sitting there in the dark of that dining room, cordless phone heavy in my hand. Silence of the house was almost total, just broken by the steady sound of rain and that electric hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Looked at those lit-up buttons on the handset. Each number seemed like a challenge. To dial meant making it all real, meant crossing a point of no return. For a second, the mother inside me, the one who gave birth, who nursed through fevers, who stayed up all night with nightmares, hesitated. A weak voice whispered in the back of my mind that this was my boy, my only child, asking if I could really do this to him. But then pain in my head throbbed sharp, and that taste of blood came back in my mouth. The hesitation vanished like smoke. That man upstairs snoring in the room I'd decorated with so much love was not my boy anymore. My boy wouldn't throw me into a wall. My boy wouldn't raise his hand to me. That man was a dangerous stranger, and I needed to protect myself from him. Took a deep breath and dialed the first number. My fingers trembled some, but I pressed those buttons firm. Sound of the ringing, that steady tone, sounded absurdly loud in the quiet house. It was almost 4 in the morning. I was calling to wake up a 74-year-old retired federal judge. On the other end, third ring, a sleepy but instantly sharp voice answered. I apologized for calling at this hour, said it was me, Dorothy. There was a pause. Heard her stirring, sound of sheets moving. The sleepiness in Eleanor's voice vanished, replaced by immediate concern. She asked what happened, if I was all right, if it was Darnell. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, my neighbor for over 40 years. We'd watched our kids grow up together, buried our husbands within months of each other, shared countless cups of tea on each other's porches. But Eleanor was more than a friend. Before she retired, she was one of the most respected judges in South Carolina. A black woman who broke through barriers, who faced down the system, and won. Her mind was sharp as a razor blade, and her presence commanded respect that few people could match. If there was anybody in the world who'd understand the complexity of my situation, the mix of love and terror, it was her. Swallowed hard. Shame burned my throat. I told her I needed her, that it happened again, but this time it was worse. Didn't need to say more. Heard her sigh on the other end. Heavy sigh, not of surprise, but of deep sadness, of confirmation of what she'd suspected. She asked if he hurt me. Tears welled up in my eyes again, but my voice stayed steady. I told her yes. She said to call the police without hesitation. Wasn't a question. It was a command. I told her I was going to, but first I needed to ask her something. I know it was a lot to ask, but could she come over for breakfast at 8 o'clock sharp? Another pause. Could almost feel those gears of her brilliant mind turning. She didn't ask why I wanted to serve breakfast in a situation like this. She understood. Understood this wasn't about food. It was about bearing witness. It was about authority. She told me she wasn't coming for breakfast, her voice turning hard as steel. She said she was coming to hold court. Asked where my boy was right now. I whispered that he was sleeping, drunk, in his room. She said good, told me to let him sleep, not to talk to him, not to make a sound, just to do what I needed to do. She'd be there at 8. And then she told me I was doing the right thing, the hardest and the rightest thing, that she was proud of me. When she hung up, felt a wave of relief so strong my legs went weak. Wasn't alone anymore. The cavalry was coming. And my cavalry wore an impeccable suit and had the U.S. Constitution memorized by heart. Took a deep breath, gathered my strength, and dialed the second number. Charleston Police Department. A tired night shift operator answered. The operator asked what my emergency was. I explained it wasn't exactly an emergency, gave my name as Dorothy Williams, and said I'd like to speak with Detective James Thompson if possible. The operator told me it was 4:30 in the morning and Detective Thompson was off duty. I insisted, with a firmness that surprised even me, that I knew that. But we went to the same church, Grace Methodist. I said please, that I needed them to contact him, that this was regarding a domestic violence situation and I was the victim. The shift in that operator's tone was immediate. Bureaucracy gave way to urgency. She told me to hold on a moment. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. Detective James, a good man, a deacon at our church. He'd known Darnell since he was a little boy in the children's choir. Watched Darnell grow up, watched him become a man. But he was also a cop, a man of the law. I wasn't calling Brother James the deacon. I was calling Detective Thompson the officer, and I needed him to act like one. After a few minutes that felt like hours, James's deep, familiar voice came on the line, thick with sleep and concern. He asked what was going on, if I was safe right now. And then, for the second time that night, I had to say it out loud, had to put my shame into words. I told him Darnell had assaulted me, that he came home drunk and he hit me. My voice broke on that last word. Heard a rustling sound in the background, like he was getting out of bed fast, pulling on clothes in a hurry. He asked where Darnell was now, if he was still there, if I needed him to send a car right that second. I said no, too quickly. Told him Darnell was sleeping, that I was safe for now. I explained I didn't want them coming now, that I didn't want a scene in the middle of the night with sirens and lights waking up the whole neighborhood. I said I wanted to do this my way, with dignity. He was silent, processing what I was asking. Knew I was asking for something outside of normal procedure. I continued, telling him I had a plan. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell would be here at 8 in the morning. I wanted him to come too, him and 2 other officers. I wanted them to walk in, sit down, and we were going to handle this like civilized people before they took Darnell away. James sighed, a sigh of a man torn between his duty and his affection for my family. He said it was highly irregular. I told him I knew it was, but he knew me. He knew Darnell. I explained that if a squad car showed up with sirens going, Darnell would react badly. He'd fight. He'd scream. It'd turn into a circus. I said I didn't want that I wanted him to look me in the eye, to look Mrs. Eleanor in the eye, and to look James in the eye. I wanted Darnell to understand what he'd done. I explained I didn't want him to be just another drunk being dragged out of his house, that I wanted him to feel the weight of his community's disappointment. I asked if he understood what I was saying. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he understood, that he'd be there at 8 o'clock sharp. He told me to lock myself in my room to be safe, and if Darnell woke up, if he tried anything before they got there, to call him immediately. Asked if I understood. I said I understood, and thanked him. He told me God bless, and hung up. 2 calls made, 1 more to go, the most personal one. Dialed the area code for Columbia, my sister Regina. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone. She said my name, said she felt something, that she knew it was me. Asked what he did. Regina and I always had that connection. She knew, always knew, told her everything, the broken pitcher, the yelling, the shove into the washing machine, the slap. She listened in silence, just the sound of her breathing on the other end. When I finished, she didn't say, I told you so. Didn't say, you should have left a long time ago. Just asked, her voice thick with anger and love, what I was going to do. I told her I'd called Eleanor and Detective James, that they were coming at 8, that I was turning him in. A sob escaped her. She said my name, that she was so sorry this happened. I told her I knew, that I just wanted her to know, wanted someone in our family to know what I was doing, so that if I ever doubted myself down the road, she could remind me of tonight, of this decision. She promised she'd remember that she was getting the first bus to Charleston in the morning and would be there by afternoon. I thanked her. She told me to take care of myself and to know that I was the strongest woman she knew. Hung up the phone, placed the handset back in its cradle. The 3 calls were made. 3 pillars of my plan were in place. Moral authority, the law, and family. Felt a deep weariness, an exhaustion that came from my soul, but at the same time, felt light. Like a 2-ton weight had been lifted off my back. The weight of silence. Looked at the clock. Almost 6 in the morning. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, from deep black to a bruised bluish gray. The storm had passed, had 2 hours left, 2 hours to finish preparing breakfast, 2 hours to get myself ready, 2 hours to prepare for the final battle. Went back to the kitchen and started on the blackberry jam. Justice, after all, was going to be served. And it was going to have a bittersweet taste. That gray morning light started filtering through the kitchen windows, showing the quiet chaos of my all-night vigil. There was flour dusted on the floor, dirty bowls stacked in the sink, and that sweet, heavy smell of cornbread hanging thick in the air. Sky outside was pale, washed clean by the night's rain. It was the calm after the storm, and I felt that same calm inside me. A strange, cold calm, but an unshakable one. Exhaustion weighed on my shoulders like a shroud, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Less than 2 hours to go. Needed to finish setting the stage. Wasn't enough to just have law and order on my side. Darnell needed to understand what he was losing. Needed to see, in a concrete way, the home he was destroying, the mother he was throwing away. His punishment wouldn't just be legal. It had to be visual, emotional. A picture he'd carry in his mind forever. Started cleaning the kitchen with renewed energy. Washed those dishes, scrubbing each plate and bowl with force, like I was scouring the filth from my own soul. Dried everything and put it away proper. Wiped the flour from the counter and the floor. Kitchen, in 20 minutes, was spotless, gleaming in that morning light, like the violence and despair of the night had never happened. It was a facade. A beautiful, orderly facade. Just like the life I'd been leading for the past 2 years. Then turned to the food. The muffins were already done, dozens of them, piled high on a white ceramic platter. Went to the pantry and got out a jar of blackberries. Poured them into a saucepan, added some brown sugar, a dash of cinnamon, and some freshly grated nutmeg. As those berries bubbled on the stove, the sweet and spicy smell mixed with the buttery smell of the muffins. It was the smell of Darnell's childhood. When he was a boy and got sick, I'd make him this same jam to eat with toast. He used to call it his magic medicine. The irony of it. Here I was preparing the most bitter medicine of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. While the jam thickened, I put a big pot of water on to boil for the cheese grits. Creamy grits with plenty of butter and a little sharp cheddar stirred in at the end. Soul food. But right then, it felt more like food for a condemned man. A last meal before judgment. As that water came to a boil, I focused on an important detail. The knives. Had a set of kitchen knives Thomas had given me for a birthday years ago. But last year, the wooden handle on my favorite one cracked. Regina, always paying attention, sent me a new set as a gift. From some German brand, high-quality steel, came in a heavy wooden block. She joked that now I could chop easier, kept them razor sharp, took the paring knife from that block now. The blade gleamed, used it to slice some fresh fruit to garnish the table. Strawberries, cantaloupe. Every cut was precise, clean. Moved with the skill of a woman who'd spent her life in kitchens. But that morning, there was something else in my movements. A surgical precision, like a doctor preparing for a delicate operation that a patient's life depended on. And in a way, my life depended on what was about to happen. With the food almost ready, it was time to set the table proper. Went to the china cabinet, the same one I'd been thrown against years back. Ran my hand over the dark wood, feeling the solid texture, the history in it. Opened those glass doors carefully. Smell of old wood and beeswax filled my senses. Inside was my heritage, my wedding china, my mother's crystal glasses. First, the tablecloth. Went to the linen closet in the hall and took out my best one. White, pure linen, with delicate lace trim handmade by my grandmother. Used it so rarely, it still smelled of the lavender sachets I kept with it. Spread it over that dining room table. The stark white fabric covered the dark wood, creating a shocking contrast. A blank canvas for the scene to come, then the china. Went back to the cabinet and, with careful hands, took out the dinner set. Plates, saucers, cups. Each piece was white with a thin gold rim and tiny hand-painted blue flowers. Washed them in the sink one by one to get any dust off, dried them with a soft cloth. Set 4 places at the table, one at the head for me. One to my right for Eleanor, one to my left for Detective James, and one at the other end, facing me directly, Darnell's place. Placed the silver next to each plate, white linen napkins, ironed crisp, folded neat, a small crystal vase with a single white gardenia from my garden in the center of the table. The table was set fit for a king, or for a sacrifice. The line between the two, I was discovering, was very thin. Everything was ready. The food, the table. Now it was my turn. Went upstairs, steps creaking under my feet. The upstairs hallway was dark and quiet. Walked past Darnell's door. Could hear him snoring, a heavy, harsh sound. The sound of a man sleeping the sleep of the unaware, with no idea the earthquake that was about to shatter his whole world. For a brief second, felt a pang of pity. An almost overwhelming urge to open that door, shake him awake, scream at him to wake up before it was too late. But I didn't. Took a deep breath and continued on to my own room. Entered my sanctuary. My room was simple, tidy. The patchwork quilt I'd made myself was on the bed. White lace curtains filtered that gray morning light. Went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the large mirror. The sight was still shocking. Bruise under my eye was darker now, an ugly smudge of blue and purple. My lip more swollen. Needed a shower, needed to wash the smell of fear and flour from my body. Turned on the tub faucet and let hot water run. Added some lavender bath salts, and fragrant steam filled the bathroom. While the tub filled, went to my closet. Didn't hesitate. Went straight to the back where I kept clothes I rarely wore, and I took out the dress. It was a church dress, made of crepe, in a deep navy blue. Long sleeves, modest neckline, fell straight to mid-calf. Elegant, sober dress. The kind you wear to church, or to a funeral, or, as I was about to find out, to a judgment. Took my bath. Hot water stung my bruised back, but also relaxed my tense muscles. Washed my hair, scrubbing my scalp hard, tried not to think, just focused on the sensations, the water, the soap, the steam, got out, dried off, and put on that navy dress. Fit perfectly. Combed my wet hair and pinned it into a low, tight bun at the nape of my neck. Looked in the mirror again. Bruise and cut lip stood out even more against my clean skin and the dark fabric of the dress. And that's exactly what I wanted. Wasn't gonna hide a single thing. My wounds were my witnesses. Sat at my vanity. Don't wear much makeup usually, just a little powder and lipstick. But that morning I made a point of it. Dusted my face with rice powder to take away shine. Then opened the drawer and took out something I kept for special occasions. A back support belt. One of those medical ones, you know? Discreet, skin-toned, to wear under clothes. Bought it online some time ago for days when my arthritis acted up real bad. Put it on under the dress now, pulling it tight. Gave my back immediate support, easing the pain from the blow, and more importantly, forcing me to keep my posture straight. I would not slouch. Not today. Looked at the clock on my bedside table. 7:40. Almost time. Went downstairs. House was filled with smells and silent expectation. Poured the fresh coffee into a porcelain pot, the grits into a serving bowl, the jam into a crystal dish. Carried everything to the dining room table. Everything was perfect, dangerously perfect. Sat down in my chair at the head of the table, smoothed the navy dress over my knees. My hands were calm now. My heart was beating in a steady, slow rhythm. I was ready, and that's when I heard it. Sound of footsteps upstairs, creak of floorboards in Darnell's room. He was awake. The guest of honor was about to come down for his feast. Sound of footsteps upstairs was unmistakable. First, the groan of bed springs, a heavy, lazy sound. Then shuffling of feet on the wood floor. Knew that routine by heart. It was the sound of a hangover, the sound of a man moving through fog of headache and shallow regret. Stayed seated, motionless, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the texture of my dress. My heart didn't speed up. My breathing didn't change. I was the picture of serenity, a calm statue sitting at the head of a war table. Heard the water run in the upstairs bathroom. Quick shower. He always did that, like water could wash away not just the dirt from his body, but the filth from his soul. Foolish man. His filth was bone deep. Footsteps started again, now coming down the stairs. One step at a time, heavy, deliberate. The staircase in our house is old, solid wood, and each step has its own unique groan. Knew them like I knew the notes of a hymn. Could tell just by the sound where he was. Halfway down. 3 steps to go. Now in the front hall. There was a pause. Knew what he was seeing. That hall table and the broken pieces of my green pitcher still on the floor. Hadn't cleaned it up. Left it on purpose. Wanted it to be the first thing he saw. The physical evidence of his nighttime rage. Hoped it might bring him a sliver of shame, of remorse. But what I heard next wasn't a sigh of regret. It was a huff, a sound of annoyance, and then heard the sound of those shards being kicked into a corner with his shoe, carelessly, like it was just trash. In that moment, any lingering shred of pity I might have had for him evaporated like water on hot pavement. All that was left was the coldness of my resolve. And then he appeared in that dining room doorway, stood there, his hand on the doorframe, and blinked, adjusting to the light. Morning sun, still weak, was streaming through the large window, lighting up that set table. He was dressed in wrinkled khaki pants and a polo shirt that had seen better days. His hair was still damp from the shower, but his face was puffy, his eyes red and small. Stubble on his chin gave him an air of sloppiness, of defeat. He took in the scene. The white lace tablecloth, the fine china, gleaming silver, steaming platters of food. Smell of coffee, cornbread muffins, blackberry and cinnamon. scanned it all, and a look of confusion settled on his face. He was expecting yelling, accusations, or at best, my silent treatment, my icy distance. He wasn't prepared for this unexplainable celebration. He looked at me, and for the first time that morning, he seemed to really notice my face. Saw his eyes fix for a second on my swollen lip, on the bruise blooming on my cheek. But his reaction wasn't shock or guilt. It was an almost imperceptible twitch of his lips, a glimmer of satisfaction, of power. And then the confusion on his face morphed into something else. Arrogance. A slow, crooked smile spread across his face. He'd read it all wrong. In his sick mind, this feast wasn't a trap. It was a peace offering, a white flag of surrender. In his mind, that slap from the night before had worked. He'd finally put me in my place. And now, like a good submissive mother, I was apologizing with food. The sight was so absurd, so twisted from reality, I almost would have laughed if it wasn't so tragic. He said, "Well, well," his voice still hoarse from the hangover. He straightened up, puffing out his chest, and walked to the table like a king surveying his kingdom. Asked what he owed the honor of this grand feast. Didn't answer. Just watched him, keeping my expression neutral. My silence seemed to amuse him even more. He pulled out his chair, the one at the opposite end from me, and threw himself into it with a thud. Picked up a linen napkin, looked at it with fake sophistication, and tossed it in his lap. Then reached out and took a muffin from the basket. The most perfect one, the most golden one of all. Held it up for a moment, saying he had to admit that nobody made cornbread like I did. Then took a huge bite. Ate with his mouth open, no manners at all, crumbs falling from his mouth onto the pristine tablecloth. Chewed loudly, and after he swallowed, pointed what was left of that muffin at me. He said there I went, that I'd finally figured out who was running things around here. Said a little bit of discipline, and everything falls right back into place. That's how it's gotta be. His voice was full of that cruel victory. His words hit me, but I didn't show it. On the outside, I was a statue of ice. On the inside, every word he spoke was another nail in the coffin of my old life. He felt no remorse. He felt pride. Pride in having hurt me. Pride in having humiliated me. He believed violence was the answer. Just stared at him from across that table. Silence stretched out. He shrugged and picked up his coffee cup. Was about to pour himself some when the sound cut through the air. The doorbell rang. Sharp, clear, punctual. Darnell stopped, his hand hovering over the coffee pot. Scowl of irritation formed on his forehead. He asked who the hell that was this time of morning. Asked if I'd invited somebody. I said yes, and it was the first word I'd spoken that morning. My voice came out calm, steady. I told him I did. He growled, asking what I meant, slamming the cup down on its saucer. He said he didn't want to see anyone, told me to send them away, whoever it was. Ignored his command. With a slow, deliberate movement, placed my hands on the table, pushed myself up, and stood. Smoothed the front of my navy dress. And I walked, without hurrying, out of that dining room and toward the front hall. He yelled after me, asking if I didn't hear him, saying he told me to send them away. His voice followed me, full of anger at my disobedience. Didn't look back, just kept walking. My church shoes made a soft sound on the wood floor. Reached the front door, took one last deep breath. Looked at my distorted reflection in the glass of the door. Saw the woman in navy with the bruised face and the posture of a queen. It was time. Turned the brass knob and pulled that door open. Charleston morning air drifted in, fresh and damp. On my porch stood the three people I was expecting. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, immaculate in her peach linen suit, wearing a string of pearls and a serious expression that would make any lawyer tremble. Beside her, Detective James Thompson, tall and imposing in his uniform, his cap held in his hand, his face grim with concern and duty. and behind him 2 younger officers, both with professional, neutral expressions. Looked at Eleanor. She looked at my face, at my lip, at my eye. Saw a flash of fury in her eyes, but she controlled it instantly. Just gave me a nod, an almost imperceptible movement, but it said everything. I'm here. We're here. Eleanor greeted me, her voice as firm as a judge's in a courtroom. I greeted them back, my voice just as steady. Told them to please come in, that the coffee was ready. Stepped back from the door, holding it open for them. They entered in silence, one by one. Their presence filled my small hallway. Authority, the law, justice itself. They walked behind me toward the dining room. Darnell, who'd gotten up annoyed to see what was going on, was standing in the doorway of the room. And that's when his world fell apart. When he saw the group walking in, when he saw Eleanor with her courtroom bearing, when he saw the uniform on Detective James and those other 2 officers, his jaw dropped open. The arrogance melted away like sugar in rain. His face went from annoyed to confused, and from confused to purest, most absolute panic. The color drained from his skin, leaving behind that sickly, grayish tone of sheer fear. His wide eyes jumped from me to them and back to me. Opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. His hand, which was still holding a piece of that muffin, went limp, and the muffin fell, hit the china plate, then rolled onto the floor, breaking into crumbs. A tiny sound, the sound of the end of his reign. The silence in that dining room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Only sound was the slow, steady ticking of that grandfather clock in the next room, each second marking Darnell's agony. He was frozen in place, his face a gray mask of terror. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from one face to another, like a cornered animal looking for an escape route where there wasn't one. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw in his eyes not anger or contempt, but a terrified question asking what I'd done. Didn't have to answer. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell did it for me with her actions. With a calm that was both terrifying and magnificent, she took a step forward. Completely ignored Darnell's presence, like he was an unimportant piece of furniture. Walked with her usual elegance to the dining room table. Her low-heeled shoes made a soft, determined sound on the wood floor. Didn't go to the place I'd set for her to my right. No. Went straight to the chair at the head of the table, facing me. The chair Darnell had just abandoned. The chair that by right and tradition belonged to the head of the family. Thomas's chair. She pulled out that heavy wooden chair with a smooth movement, the scraping sound echoing in the room. She sat down. Straightened the jacket of her linen suit, placed her leather purse on the floor beside her. And then she looked at Darnell. Just looked. There was no anger in her gaze, no pity. There was only the weight of 60 years of friendship with me and the weight of a lifetime spent upholding the law. It was a look that stripped the soul bare. Under that gaze, Darnell seemed to shrink. The big, imposing man who'd thrown me into a wall hours before now looked like an awkward, frightened boy lost in a grown-up's living room. Detective James and the other 2 officers remained standing in the doorway, positioned strategically. They didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Their presence, those dark blue uniforms, the belts with their holstered weapons, it all spoke for itself. They were the consequence. The physical and legal answer to the violence of the night. Mrs. Eleanor, still without taking her eyes off my son, reached out and took the porcelain coffee pot. She said the coffee smelled wonderful, her voice calm and velvety, as if she were commenting on the weather at afternoon tea. Poured herself a cup, dark, steaming liquid filling the white china. Took the small cream pitcher and added a drop. Stirred the coffee with a silver spoon. Gentle sounds of metal against porcelain cutting through the tension. Took a sip. Then placed the cup back on its saucer with calculated delicacy. Finally, she spoke to Darnell. She said his name, and her voice was low, but it carried an authority that filled every corner of the room. She told him she remembered when he was just a little boy that he used to come running to her fence with a dandelion in his hand, telling her to look, bringing her a flower. Darnell swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. She continued, saying she remembered him carrying her grocery bags from the store, even when they were almost bigger than he was. Such a polite boy, so kind. She said he'd always tell her to let him get that she shouldn't be straining herself. She paused, taking another sip of coffee. Every word she spoke was a small blow, a reminder of the man he should have been, in stark contrast to the man he'd become. Wasn't an accusation. It was a eulogy. She said his father, and Thomas's name seemed to hang in the air like incense, would have been so proud of that boy. The boy who became a man, went to college, first in the family. Pride of their community, pride of his mother. Paused and glanced at me. Then her eyes returned to Darnell, and the softness in her voice was gone, replaced by a blade of steel. She asked where he went, where that man was now. Darnell opened his mouth, a hoarse sound, a groan escaped. He told Eleanor he didn't know what she was talking about, that this was just a family misunderstanding. Wrong thing to say. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She repeated his words, asking if this was a family misunderstanding. Her voice was dripping with cold irony, gestured with her chin in my direction. She told him to look at his mother's face, to look closely, asking if that on my lip and the bruise forming under my eye looked like a misunderstanding to him. He couldn't look. His eyes fell to the floor, to the crumbs of the muffin he'd dropped. Eleanor's voice was sharp now. She said no, that it had a name, and they both knew what it was. That was Detective James's cue. He stepped forward, pulling a small notepad from his uniform pocket. His presence was imposing. He looked at Darnell with an expression of profound disappointment. Detective James said Darnell's full name, his voice grave and official, without the warmth of Brother James from church. He said they'd received multiple complaints of disturbing the peace from his neighbors over the last 6 months. Loud noise, late-night music, shouting. Darnell hunched his shoulders, still staring at that floor. The detective continued, flipping a page in his notepad, saying they also had a record of an altercation at the Rusty Anchor Tavern 3 weeks ago. He said Darnell was involved in a fight and had to be restrained by security, that he was released with a warning. Darnell's head came up a little, surprised he knew about that. James said they had 2 reports, not yet confirmed by traffic stops, of him driving recklessly after leaving said establishment. He said in short, Darnell had been on their radar. James paused, and his gaze grew even more serious. He said, and then this morning, at 4:37 a.m., he received a phone call, a domestic assault complaint, from this address, the victim being his mother, Dorothy Williams. Every word from the detective was a nail being hammered, the list of his failures, his transgressions, being read aloud in his childhood dining room in front of the woman who was like a second mother to him. The humiliation was palpable. The air was thick with it. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. My back was aching, but that support belt I'd put on under my dress kept me upright, would not falter. Not now. Walked slowly around the table until I was standing next to Eleanor's chair. Placed my hand on her shoulder, felt the solidity, the support. And then I looked at my son. Not at the floor, not at the wall, straight into his eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I was the one who made him look away. I said his name. My voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. It was the voice of a woman who'd walked through hell during the night and come out the other side. Needed him to understand. This wasn't about hate. It was about something much more complicated. I told him I didn't call them here out of hate, that I called them because I loved him. He snorted, a sound of scorn. He asked how I loved him if I was calling the cops on somebody I loved. I replied without blinking, saying sometimes the greatest act of love isn't protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. It's delivering them to those consequences. The room fell silent again. Only thing moving was the steam rising from the coffee cups, like souls ascending. The trap was set. The witnesses were in place. The law was present. And now it was the victim's time to speak. Darnell's scornful laugh hung in the air for a second, thin and brittle, before it died under the weight of my gaze. He repeated my words, asking if I called this love, his voice rising an octave, bordering on hysterical. He said this was betrayal, that I was turning him over to strangers, that this was family business, ours. Eleanor's voice cut through the air, cold and precise as a scalpel. She didn't even bother to look at him, continued sipping her coffee as if discussing a trivial matter. She said no, that it stopped being family business the moment he raised his hand to the woman who gave him life. She said at that instant, it became a community matter, a legal matter, and she said, if she may say so, setting her cup down and fixing her eyes on him, it became her matter. The power in those last words silenced Darnell instantly. Arguing with me was one thing. Arguing with Judge Eleanor Mitchell was something else entirely. He shut his mouth, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and fear. I remained standing next to Eleanor, my hand still on her shoulder. Felt like I was drawing her strength, her courage. Looked at my son, that frightened man-child across the table, and the torrent of words I'd held back for 2 years finally found their way out. I repeated his words about family business, my voice low but every syllable weighted with pain. I asked if he wanted to talk about family. I said, let's talk. I told him family was his father Thomas working from sunup to sundown at that port, his hands covered in calluses, his back aching, to make sure he had books for school and food on this very table. That's family, I said. Took a step, moving around Eleanor's chair, getting a little closer to him. I told him family was me after his father was gone, working as a seamstress until my fingers bled, then going to clean office floors downtown, coming home in the dead of night, just to make sure his college tuition was paid, to make sure he'd have a better future than we did. That's family, I said. He shrank back in his chair, unable to meet my gaze. I continued, asking and what about him, my voice beginning to tremble, not with weakness, but with righteous anger finally breaking free. I told him what he did with this family. I said he took his father's sacrifice and my sacrifice, and he spat on it. He took the pain of his demotion, his frustration, his inability to deal with life's problems like a man, and he turned it into a weapon. And he aimed that weapon at me, the only person in the world who never, ever gave up on him. Tears began streaming down my face, but I didn't care, didn't wipe them away, let them fall, like liquid witnesses to my pain. I told him night after night I sat in this house and I prayed. But my prayers had changed. I used to pray for his safety, for his success. Now I prayed that he'd come home and go straight to bed without speaking to me. I prayed that his poison wouldn't touch me. I prayed to be invisible in my own home. I told him he'd turned my home into a prison, that he'd turned my mother's love into a life sentence. He stammered that he didn't mean to hurt me, finally looking up. There were tears in his eyes too, but they were tears of self-pity. He said he drank too much, that he lost his head. He said it wouldn't happen again, swearing to God it wouldn't. I said, oh no, 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 shaking my head slowly. I told him not to use God's name in this house, not today. I asked how many times I'd heard that promise. How many hungover mornings had he woken up crying, begging for my forgiveness? And I, like a fool, believed him. Every single time, I forgave him. I cleaned up his messes. I lied to the neighbors. I hid my tears. I protected him. I asked if he knew what my forgiveness did, what my protection did. Leaned over that table, my knuckles resting on the lace tablecloth. I told him it gave him permission. My silence, my forgiveness. They told him it was okay. That he could yell, that he could break things, that he could humiliate me. And last night they told him that he could hit me. The word hit hung in the air, ugly and irrefutable. I went on, my voice now a hoarse whisper, asking if he knew what the worst part was. I told him it wasn't the pain. The physical pain goes away, the bruise will fade, the lip will heal. I said the worst part was his silence afterward. The way he turned his back and went upstairs like he'd just stepped on a bug. His total and complete lack of remorse. I told him it was right there in his silence that I understood. I understood that I wasn't dealing with my son having a bad day anymore. I was dealing with a man who took pleasure in inflicting pain on someone weaker, and that person was me. Straightened up, glanced at Detective James. His face was impassive, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He was a father of daughters. He understood. I told Darnell I carried him for 9 months, turning my gaze back to my son. I raised him. I gave him my life. And my mother's love was the strongest thing I had. But my love did not require me to be his punching bag. My love did not require me to be an accomplice to his destruction. And protecting him from himself at this point was exactly that. It was helping him destroy himself and taking me down with him. He started crying for real now. Loud, childish sobs. He begged me not to do this, saying he'd go to rehab, that he'd stop drinking, that he'd go back to church. Anything. But not to let them take him. Please. He said it was family business. Detective James's voice sounded calm but final. He said the law was clear on domestic assault, that it wasn't something they could ignore. Darnell whimpered, asking in a last, pathetic attempt what the neighbors would say. And that's when something inside me snapped completely. Looked at him and said I didn't care what the neighbors said anymore. I'd spent the last 2 years caring about that, and look where we were. I told him from today on, I only cared about one thing, my peace. And my peace, I said, began with his absence from this house. Sat down in my chair again, picked up my linen napkin, and with perfectly steady hands served myself a spoonful of cheese grits. Wasn't going to eat, not really. My stomach was a knot of anguish, but the act was symbolic. I was taking back my life, my table, my house. Eleanor, seeing my gesture, nodded slowly. Turned to Darnell, his face a mess of tears and snot. She said his tears didn't move her, calling him boy, her voice without a shred of sympathy. She told him an abuser's tears were always about himself, never about the pain he'd caused. She said his mother, by doing this, was giving him the only chance he had. The chance to face the man in the mirror without the excuse of the bottle, without the shield of her easy forgiveness. She said she was forcing him to grow up. And that, she told him, was the greatest, most painful, and truest act of love he would ever receive. Turned to Detective James and gave a slight nod of her head. It was the signal. The trial at the dining room table was over. The sentence was about to be carried out. Eleanor's nod was almost imperceptible, but to Detective James it was as clear as the sound of a judge's gavel hitting wood. He put his notepad away in his uniform pocket, and the small gesture marked the end of the conversation and the beginning of the action. Took a step forward, fully entering the dining room. The younger officer who'd been posted near the door followed him. The air in the room, which was already heavy, became thin. Felt my chest tighten. It was real. It was happening. Detective James's voice was formal, devoid of any warmth. He was no longer Brother James from church. He was the law. He told Darnell to please stand up and place his hands behind his back. Darnell's crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a look of panic and disbelief. Looked from James to me and back to James. He stammered that they couldn't be serious. He said James had known him since he was a kid, that he saw him get baptized, asking if he was really going to arrest him in his own house, in front of his mother. James replied, his voice firm, unwavering, saying he was arresting him because of his mother and because the law required him to. He asked Darnell to please not make this any harder than it already was. The second officer moved up behind Darnell's chair. The movement was what finally seemed to break my son's trance. The panic turned to rage. He shoved his chair back with a loud bang and jumped to his feet, his face tight with anger. He yelled at them not to touch him, pointing a finger at the officer. He said this was absurd, that it was family business, that she was his mother, that they fight sometimes, that everybody fights. Turned to me, his eyes pleading and furious at the same time. He begged me to tell them to stop, saying it was just an argument, that he lost his head, asking me to tell them I didn't want to press charges. Everyone in that room looked at me. His question hung in the air. The last chance for me to back down, to go back to being the protective mother, the fearful woman. For a second, just a second, my heart faltered. To see my son, my baby, in this situation, cornered, desperate. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to endure. But then I thought of that laundry room floor, the taste of blood, the feel of his hand across my face. And I found my voice. My voice came out low but clear. I told him I'd said everything I had to say, that I wasn't going to lie for him, not anymore. Those words were the final sentence. Darnell's face crumbled. Anger gave way to abject despair. He seemed to deflate, like his spine had been removed. He knew he'd lost. He whispered please, his voice broken, begging me not to do this. Detective James didn't wait any longer. With a swift, practiced move, took Darnell's arm and turned him around. The younger officer took the other hand. And then I heard the sound. The metallic, dry sound of steel teeth locking together. The sound of handcuffs closing. Sound of freedom for me, and sound of rock bottom for him. Darnell let out a sob, a guttural sound of pure defeat. Didn't resist anymore. Just stood there, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped, as Detective James read him his rights. He said Darnell had the right to remain silent, that anything he said could and would be used against him in a court of law. The detective's voice was a monotone drone, the familiar litany I'd only ever heard on television. To hear it in my own dining room, being read to my own son, was surreal. Eleanor didn't move. Remained seated, a silent and regal witness, her presence an anchor of dignity in the chaos of my life. She was proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting. They started to escort him out of the room. As Darnell passed by me, he stopped for an instant, lifted his head and looked me in the eye. His face was wet with tears. He said, "Mama," thought he was going to apologize. But no, he said I was going to regret this. His voice low, full of poison that chilled my blood. He told me I was going to be all alone in this old house with my old junk, and that I was going to regret it. It was a threat. Last attempt of a tyrant to maintain control through fear. But the fear in me had died that morning. Met his gaze without flinching. Didn't feel anger. Felt nothing but deep, abysmal sadness. And pity. Pity for the weak man he'd become. I replied, my voice steady, without a hint of hesitation. I told him that maybe I'd regret that it had to come to this. But I would never ever regret choosing my own life today. Detective James gently pulled him by the arm, and they continued walking. Watched them as they crossed the front hall. The other officer opened the front door. Bright morning sun flooded the hallway, making me blink. Didn't go to the door. Didn't want to see curious neighbors peering out their windows. Didn't want to see the look on my son's face as he was put into a police car. Stood just inside my dining room and just listened. Heard their footsteps on the wooden porch. Heard Detective James's voice saying something to him. And then heard the sound of the police car door slamming shut. A hollow, final sound. Then the sound of the engine starting and driving away until it faded into the distance. And then the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence, not the heavy, oppressive silence of the early morning. It was a light silence. Empty, yes. Painful, without a doubt. But light. It was the silence of peace. The silence of a house that no longer held fear. Just stood there for I don't know how long. My muscles, which had been tense for hours, began to relax. The adrenaline that had kept me on my feet started to dissipate, and a wave of exhaustion so overwhelming hit me all at once. My knees buckled. Before I could fall, felt a firm hand on my arm. It was Eleanor. She'd gotten up and come to me. She held me steady, and the other officer, the one who'd stayed behind, came over and pulled out a chair for me. Eleanor helped me sit down. She said it was over, her voice soft for the first time that morning. She told me it was over. And it was only then, sitting there in my dining room with the smell of coffee and cornbread muffins still in the air, with my best friend beside me, that I allowed myself to fall apart. Covered my face with my hands, and I wept. Wept for the loss of my son, for the shame, for the pain. Wept for the boy he once was and the man he never became. Wept for the loneliness that lay ahead of me. And I wept too for the terrifying relief of being finally and absolutely free. The days that followed Darnell's arrest were the strangest of my life. The house suddenly felt enormous, like a cavern. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of that clock, echoed in the emptiness he'd left behind. At first, I kept expecting to run into him around a corner, expected to hear his heavy footsteps on those stairs, the sound of the TV turned up too loud on the sports channel. But there was nothing. Just silence. A silence that for the first few days was as deafening as his yelling had been. Eleanor and my sister Regina, who arrived from Colombia that same afternoon, formed a protective wall around me. Regina cleaned up the mess in the hallway, picking up those shards of my green pitcher with a look of quiet fury on her face. She told me she'd glue every piece back together, but some things, once they're broken, are never the same again. Knew she wasn't just talking about the pitcher. Eleanor, for her part, handled the outside world, spoke to the neighbors with a short, dignified version of the facts, cutting off any gossip at the root. She told them Darnell was unwell and required a serious intervention, that I was brave and did what had to be done, and that the family asked for privacy and prayers. The word of a retired federal judge, honey, carries more weight than any porch gossip ever could. They made me eat. Regina made my favorite soups. Eleanor brought over slices of pecan pie. But the food had no taste to me. Felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body, watching some sad old woman move through her house like a ghost. The hardest part was the nights. Lying in my bed, in the absolute quiet of the upstairs, knowing that the room next door, my son's room, was empty. Would imagine where he was, in a cold cell at the county jail, with strangers, with criminals. The mother in me would scream inside, felt like a traitor, had nightmares. Dreamt he was a little boy again, crying behind bars, and I couldn't reach him through them. Woke up several times with my face wet with tears and my pillow soaked. It was Eleanor who, on the third day, sat with me on the porch and gave me the harshest medicine. She told me to stop it, her voice firm, but not without compassion. She said to stop torturing myself like this. She told me I didn't put him there. His choices put him there. The liquor put him there. His anger put him there. She said I just opened the door so the consequences could walk in. And I only did that when my own life was at risk. She was right. I knew she was. But a mother's heart doesn't run on logic. It runs on stubborn, sometimes blind love that doesn't know when to quit. That same week I took the first step for my own safety. Always been a woman who felt safe in her home, never even locked my doors during the day. But Darnell's threat at the door saying I was going to regret this had lodged itself in the back of my mind like a splinter. Called a company I saw advertised online and had a security system installed. Little, discreet cameras on the front and back porches and an alarm with sensors on all the doors and windows. The young technician who came to install it was very kind. Showed me how to arm and disarm the system with a small keypad by the door. First night I pressed those buttons and heard the soft sound confirming the house was locked down. I breathed a little deeper. It was a small bit of control, but it was my control. My sense of security was no longer something that depended on someone else's mood. The second step was at the suggestion of Pastor William from our church. He came to visit, brought me a book of Psalms, and talked with me for a long time. He told me the body heals, but the soul needs a different kind of doctor. Gave me the card of a therapist, a Dr. Patricia Monroe, a black woman specializing in family trauma in the community. I hesitated. In my generation, we didn't do therapy. We talked to God, to our pastor, to our friends. But the world had changed, and I needed more help than the hymnal could give me. My first session with Dr. Patricia was terrifying. Sat in her calm office with its comfortable chairs and the smell of chamomile tea in the air, and I couldn't speak. Shame was a lump in my throat choking me, but she was patient, didn't push, just sat there with me in my silence until finally I started to cry. And after I cried, I started to talk, and I talked for a solid hour without stopping, talked about my fear, my guilt, my love, my anger, and she listened. For the first time, I felt like someone was hearing me without judging me. As I began my stumbling path to healing, Darnell was starting his own. Because of the complaint and my testimony, he was charged with assault. His history of disturbing the peace didn't help his case any. Eleanor explained that for a first violence offense, he likely wouldn't get a long prison sentence, but the court would almost certainly order him into mandatory rehab for alcohol and anger management. And that's exactly what happened. He stayed in county jail for 3 weeks, waiting for his hearing. And it was during that time the letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope from the county jail. My name and address were written in his handwriting, which I'd know anywhere. My hands trembled as I took it from the mailbox, sat in that folding chair on the porch to read it. Afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders, opened the envelope carefully. Letter was short, written on a sheet of lined paper. It began with, "Mom." He said he didn't really know how to start this, that he guessed "I'm sorry" wasn't enough. He'd said and done unforgivable things. He knew that now. These past 3 weeks in there, sober, with nothing to distract him, they'd been the longest and clearest of his life. He'd had to look at the man he'd become, and he didn't like what he saw. Saw a bitter, weak man who blamed everyone for his problems, especially the one person who loved him most. He said he didn't remember everything from that night, but he remembered enough. And the image of my face, the fear in my eyes. He'd never forget that. He hated himself for causing me that. He wrote that when they put those cuffs on him, he hated me, blamed me. But in there, in this quiet, he understood. I didn't do that to him. I did that for him. I hit the emergency button because the plane was going down and he was too busy fighting. I stopped him. And maybe, as crazy as it sounds, I saved his life. He said he wasn't asking for my forgiveness, didn't deserve it, just wanted me to know that he understood now. He thanked me for having the courage he didn't have. It was signed Darnell. Read that letter 2-3 times. Tears ran down my face and dripped onto the paper, blurring some of the ink. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope, maybe? Relief? Don't quite know. It was the first time in over 2 years I'd heard my son's real voice. Not the voice of the drunken monster, but the voice of the man who was lost inside. The voice of the boy who once promised me he'd make his father proud. He still had a long road ahead. The court sentenced him to 6 months in an inpatient rehab program, followed by a year of probation and mandatory therapy. 6 months felt like an eternity. But for the first time, I felt there was a light at the end of the tunnel. A long, dark, scary tunnel. But there was a light. In the months that followed, I focused on myself, continued my therapy with Dr. Patricia, rejoined the church sewing circle, started having Eleanor over for tea again, just like old times. Slowly, my house started to feel like a home again, not a prison. The silence was no longer scary. It was peaceful. Bought myself a tablet, one of those with a big screen and a nice leather case. Learned how to use it to read my books, watch the news, video call with Regina. The world, which had shrunk to the size of my house, started to expand again. And then, 6 months later, the phone rang. It was a mediator from the rehab center. Darnell had successfully completed the program. He was sober. He was working a simple job bagging groceries at a supermarket and living in a small rented apartment on the other side of Charleston. And he was asking to see me. Not at home, not alone, in a mediated session with a therapist present. My heart jumped. Fear, hope, doubt, all swirled together. Was I ready? Did I want to see him? Looked around my living room, at the afternoon sun streaming through the window, at my houseplants, at the photos of my family on the walls. I was at peace. And the question I asked myself was whether I was willing to risk this peace. That question echoed in my head for days. Was I willing to risk my peace? The peace I'd fought so hard to win back that I'd built brick by brick on the ruins of my old life. The very idea of seeing Darnell again brought back a ghost of fear, a chill down my spine I'd worked so hard to forget. Talked to Eleanor. She, practical as ever, told me the decision was mine alone. But to remember this, seeing him didn't mean forgetting. Listening didn't mean letting him back in. I could go, hear what he had to say, and keep my door and my heart locked just as firmly as before. Talked to Dr. Patricia. She went deeper. Asked what I was afraid of. Was I afraid of him? Or was I afraid of the mother inside me, the one who still wanted to forgive and forget everything? Her question hit me right in the chest. That was it. I wasn't afraid of the Darnell of now, the sober man under the watch of the law. I was afraid of myself, afraid of my almost infinite capacity to forgive, to love, to erase the mistakes of my child. Took me a week to decide, and in the end, the answer came not from my head, but from my heart. Had to go. Not for him. For me. Needed to see with my own eyes if the change was real. Needed to close that chapter, not by leaving the pages torn and scattered, but by putting a firm period at the end. A period that could, perhaps, be the start of a new sentence. The mediation session was set for a Thursday afternoon at the community center near the rehab clinic. Neutral place, safe, drove myself. As I drove, I felt my stomach churn. Was wearing a simple cotton dress, and I was gripping that steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Felt like I was going to a funeral. The mediator, a kind man named Mr. Harrison, met me at the door. Led me to a small room with a round table and 3 chairs. There was a pitcher of water and some glasses. He said Darnell was on his way. Sat down, my back straight, my purse in my lap, waited. Every second was torture. And then the door opened. The man who walked in was not the monster from that night. And he wasn't the smiling boy from my pictures either. He was a stranger. He was thin. So much thinner. The puffiness from the alcohol was gone from his face, revealing the cheekbones he'd inherited from Thomas. His hair was cut short, and his beard, once scruffy, was neatly trimmed. He wore a simple button-down shirt, ironed and clean jeans. But the biggest change was in his eyes. Those red, bloodshot eyes of anger and resentment were gone. In their place was a clear but tired gaze, a look that had seen too much crying, a look that carried the weight of deep shame. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me, didn't smile, just looked at me, and I saw both panic and hope warring in his face. Mr. Harrison invited him to sit. He sat in the chair across from me, keeping a respectful distance. The mediator began, explaining the rules. Speak respectfully. No interruptions. The goal was not reconciliation, but communication. And then he gave the floor to Darnell. He folded his hands on the table. They were trembling slightly. Looked at his own hands, not at me, as he began to speak. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He said he knew he had no right to ask me for anything, not even to be here. But he asked for this meeting because he needed to say it to my face, needed me to hear it from his mouth. Paused, taking a deep breath. Then he looked up and met my eyes. He said he was sorry. He was so sorry for the pain he caused me, for the fear, for the humiliation. He was sorry for every yell, every cruel word, every night I spent worrying. And he was so sorry that he raised his hand to me. There was no excuse. There was no justification. It wasn't the alcohol. It was him. A weak, bitter, cruel version of himself. And he would spend the rest of his life regretting it. Tears were streaming down his face, silent. He didn't wipe them away. He continued, his voice thick, saying in the program they made him look at the wreckage he left behind. And his wreckage was me. He almost destroyed me. And he knew that "I'm sorry" didn't fix anything. But he needed me to know that he knew what he did. He wasn't running from it anymore. Listened in silence to every word. Looked for falseness, for manipulation, but found none. What I saw was a broken man staring at his own shards. Mr. Harrison turned to me, asking if there was anything I'd like to say. Looked at Darnell, at my son, and I told him the truth. I told him I believed him, that I believed he was sorry, and I forgave him. A sob escaped him. A sound of such profound relief, it broke my heart, but I continued, and my voice became firm. I told him forgiving did not mean forgetting, and it did not mean going back to the way things were. That Dorothy, the mother who protected him from everything, she didn't exist anymore. He killed her that night. Saw the pain in his face, but I had to say it. I told him I was his mother, and I would always love him. But now I had to love myself more. Our relationship from today on would have boundaries. Strong ones. He had his home, I had mine. He had his life, I had mine. We would not live together again. Ever. He nodded, not arguing. I told him we could see each other, from time to time. For coffee, in a public place, but my house, my peace, they were no longer open to his storm. He needed to learn to be his own safe harbor. It was hard, every word was hard, but it was the most honest thing I'd ever said to him. And so a year passed, a year of baby steps. We stuck to the arrangement. Every 2 weeks we meet at a simple diner halfway between our homes. We sit in the same booth by the window. Always order the same thing, black coffee for him, tea with lemon for me, and a slice of pecan pie to share. We talk about his job at the grocery store, about my garden, about the weather in Charleston. Don't talk much about the past. He's in therapy. Goes to his Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every week. Hasn't had a drop of alcohol since he got out of rehab. The relationship isn't the same. The intimacy, the blind trust of a mother and child, that's gone. Maybe forever. But in its place, something new has grown. A cautious respect, a love with borders and boundaries. It's a sadder relationship, perhaps, but it's safe. And for me today, safety is worth more than anything else. Today, sitting on my porch, feeling the late afternoon breeze, I finally feel peace. The house is quiet, but it's a good quiet. It's my quiet. My son is alive, he is sober, and he is becoming, at 42, the man he should have been at 22. It took a terrible act, an immense pain for it to happen. A mother's love, I learned, sometimes has to be cruel to be kind. He tried to steal everything from me, my peace, my dignity, my home. Darnell in the end lost his freedom for a time, but in the process, he found a chance to be free from himself. I learned that true love isn't about enduring everything in silence. True love is having the courage to draw a line in the sand and say, I love you, but I love myself more. And you may not cross this line. And sometimes the family you choose to stand with you, like a judge next door and a sister in another city, is stronger than the family of blood that tries to tear you down. And you, what would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you enjoyed my story, please leave a like on the video so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for listening to An Old Woman's Truth. If my story touched your heart, please let me know and share it with someone who might need to hear it. God bless you, and take care of yourselves.